The morning sun spilled its golden rays over the mountain range, painting the sky with orange and pink shades that promised a spectacular day. It was the perfect scenario for the walk Carlos and Helena, a couple at their 60s, had planned for weeks. They loved the tranquility of the mountains, the fresh air that filled their lungs, and the soft sound of the wind whispering through the pines. The trail was familiar, a path that had already traveled dozens of times, but never stopped marveling at them with their serene and unchanging beauty. Each curve revealed a new view. Each step was a moving meditation. They felt alone, far from the excitement of the city, connected to each other and the nature that surrounded them. It was a refuge for their souls, a place where the world's worries faded like the mist. They walked in silence, absorbing the majesty of the moment, feeling the energy of the earth under their feet and gratitude in their hearts for another day together in that paradise. Suddenly, a strange sound broke the harmony of the sound landscape. It was not a bird's chilvers or a small animal rustle in the low vegetation. It was a deeper sound, a low and guttural lament that seemed to carry a huge weight. Carlos stopped abruptly, the extended hand to signal the Helena to do the same. They became immovable, their ears attentive, trying to discern the origin and nature of that melancholy sound. The lament echoed again, closer this time, vibrating in the air and seeming to come from a denser area of the forest, away from the beaten trail. Curiosity mingled with a twinge of apprehension. What could be? A wounded animal? A predator? The tranquility of the morning had been suddenly replaced by a palpable tension, a mystery that called them out of their safe and known path. The serene beauty of the mountain now hid a secret. Helena looked at Carlos, her eyes reflecting the same question that was in his mind. Should they ignore the sound and continue their safe path, or should they deviate and investigate? Their instinct of caution told them to be prudent, not to venture into the unknown. However, the sound had a quality of suffering that played its hearts. It seemed like a request for help, a silent supplication that transcended the barriers of species. They were not young adventurers looking for emotion, but people who had lived enough to recognize pain when they heard it. After a moment of hesitation, an exchange of silent looks sealed his decision. They couldn't simply turn their backs. They had to know what was going on. Compassion overcame fear, guiding its steps out of the safety of the trail and into the heart of the forest, towards the enigmatic sound. The terrain became more difficult as they advanced by dense vegetation. Branches scratched their twisted clothes, and roots threatened to make them stumble with each step. The sighty sound continued to serve as a macabre compass, guiding them more and more to the bottom of the woods. With each foot they advanced, the atmosphere seemed to be heavier, loaded with an anxious expectation. The sun, which previously warmed them, was now filtered by the treetops, creating a game of light and shadow that increased the feeling of mystery. They moved slowly, with as much care as possible, not wanting to scare the creature as it was, nor are unnecessary in danger. Adrenaline was beginning to throb in its veins, a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What would they find? The question echoed in their minds, boosting them forward despite the uncertainty that surrounded them. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, they reached a small clearing. The sunlight focused directly on this space, creating a sharp contrast to the darkness of the surrounding forest. And it was there, in the center of the clearing, they saw him. They realized that they were witnessing a desperate struggle for life, a drama of nature to unfold before their eyes. the situation was much more serious than they had imagined. This was not a simple case of a lost or slightly injured animal. The helplessness they felt was overwhelming. They were just two walkers, without any veterinary knowledge or equipment to help a creature of that size and power. Approaching would be dangerous, not only because of the size of the bull, but also because an animal with pain is unpredictable. However, the idea of abandoning him to his luck was unbearable. They were the only hope of that animal. If they were away, he would certainly die there, alone in that isolated clearing. Responsibility weighed on them. His quiet morning walk had become a crisis of conscience, a test to his humanity. The fate of that magnificent being was somehow in his hands. The decision to follow could mean the difference between life and death. With a new sense of purpose, Carlos took his cell phone out of his pocket, praying that there was a sign in that remote place. His hand shook slightly as he sought the emergency number for animals he had kept for years by precaution. Helena kept her eyes fixed on the bull, her face a mask of worry and compassion. She whispered words of comfort in the wind, hoping that somehow the creature could feel her joint presence. The clearing, once a place of shocking discovery, had now become a sanctuary of hope. They didn't know if the help would arrive on time or even if it could arrive. But they had to try. They had to do everything within their reach by that giant suffering. His journey had taken an unexpected course, leading them to a meeting that would change their lives forever. The black Taurus was a mountain of muscles and agony, a living contradiction. His coat was so dark that it seemed to absorb the sunlight itself, making it vividly stand out against the green grass of the clearing. It had a real size, with long, curved horns that pointed to the sky like a pair of scimitars. Even lying down and in suffering, his majesty was undeniable. He was a dethroned king, a titan knocked down by an invisible force. Carlos and Helena, still partially hidden by foliage, could not look away. They were mesmerized by their presence, their tragic beauty. Each panting breath of the animal seemed to echo in its own breasts. Each tremor of its body seemed to shake its souls. Never have they been so close to such a large and wild animal in life. An experience was both humiliating and deeply moving. They felt small and insignificant before that force of nature. It was then that his eyes met. The bull, in a moment of calm in his pain, slowly turned his massive head toward them. His eyes were large and dark, puddles of a deep brown that contained a universe of suffering. But there was no malice in them. There was no blind fury that one could expect from a cornered and painted wild animal. Instead, what Helena saw was something that shook her to the core, an intelligence, a consciousness, and an unequivocal appeal. The look of the bull seemed to penetrate through it, a silent communication that transcended language. It was a look that said, "I know they are there. Please help me." At that moment, the barrier between human and animal dissolved. She no longer saw a thing or a creature, but a sense of extreme need, a travel companion on this planet who was asking for help from the only way she knew. That look galvanized them to the action. The residual fear that felt evaporate, replaced by a fierce determination to save that life. While Carlos continued to fight his cell phone, trying to find a point with enough sign to make a call, Helena took a cautious step out of her hiding place. She started talking to her bull in a soft, soothing voice, the same voice she wore to calm her grandchildren when they were sick or scared. She didn't know if her words were understood, but believed that the tone, the intention, would be. The animal remained motionless, his eyes fixed on her, his breath still difficult, but perhaps a little less frantic. He seemed to be hearing, absorbing the comfort offered by that small human figure who had dared to approach. It was a fragile covenant, established through the look and sound, a bridge of compassion thrown over abyss of fear, concern, and despair fighting to the death. While Helena kept her verbal vigil, Carlos finally got a signal. With his fingers shaking urgently, he called the local veterinary service, his voice tense to report the extraordinary situation. "It's a bull, a huge black bull, is in the forest, near the tall pine track. He's very bad, lying on his side. We think he's dying." Across the line, the veterinarian's calm voice asked me precise questions, trying to evaluate the situation at a distance. Exact location, animal behavior, visible injuries. Carlos described the best he could strange swelling in the bull abdomen, his breathless breath and desperate gaze. Every second of the call seemed an eternity. The life of the bull depended on those words, the clarity of its description, and the speed of the answer they could obtain. Hope and despair fought inside his chest. The veterinarian, Dr. Orantes, promised that he would be on his way as soon as possible, but warned that he could take some time to reach the remote location and to gather the equipment needed for an animal of that size. He asked Carlos to maintain a safe distance, but to continue to observe the animal and report any change. Off the call, a heavy silence settled again in the clearing, broken only by the bull's breathing and the soft whispers of Helena. Now all they could do was wait. The wait was torture. And his presence was a comfort, perhaps, but it was not a cure. The life of the black giant was suspended by a thread, and time was his most cruel enemy. Helena approached a little closer, sitting on the floor at a distance she considered safe. He continued his unilateral conversation, telling the bull about his day, about the flowers he turns on the trail, about the beauty of the mountains. His voice was a soft mantra, an attempt to anchor the suffering animal in the present, to give him something that focuses on beyond his agonizing pain. The bull seemed to answer. The tremor on his body has slowly decreased, and his head turned firmly toward him. It was as if Helena's calm and compassionate presence was having a real effect, a balm for her tormented soul. Carlos watched the scene with amazement. His always so kind and reserved wife was communicating with a wild creature in a way that he had never thought to be possible. It was a demonstration of pure and fearless empathy. The sun began to rise higher in the sky, the heat intensifying in the clearing. Time passed, and Carlos and Helena's anxiety grew every minute. Would the vet find them? Would it arrive on time? The bull began to get agitated again, his pain intensifying in waves. He hit his tail on the floor and dropped a moan that was almost a roar of frustration and despair. Helena backed down a little, fear returning for a moment. The brute force of the animal was evident, even in its weakened condition. A false movement, a spasm of pain, and it could hurt them severely, even without intention. They were walking in a thread between compassion and danger, a delicate balance that required all their courage and common sense. The mystery of swelling in his abdomen continued to torment them. What kind of disease or injury could something like this? An intestinal twist? A tumor? They speculated in whispers, their minds looking for a logical explanation for what they saw, but none seemed adequate. The strangeness of the situation increased its sense of urgency. It was not a simple wound that could heal over time. It was internal, complex, and clearly fatal if it was not treated quickly. The life of the bull was fading before his eyes, and the mystery contained in his body was the key to his salvation or condemnation. His impotence was a source of deep anguish, a weight in the heart that became heavier with every panting breath of the black giant. When they were almost losing their hope, they heard a distant sound. It was not the bull's regret, but a mechanical sound, the snoring of an engine fighting the rugged terrain. The sound became louder, closer, and then they saw it. A robust white van with the veterinary service logo, making way slowly through the vegetation on the edge of the clearing. The help had arrived. An immense relief, so powerful that he almost put them on his knees, flooded Carlos and Helena. Hope, which had begun to fade, rekindled with a renewed force. They were no longer alone. The fate of the black giant no longer rested on his shoulders. The arrival of Dr. Arantes marked the end of his lone vigil and the beginning of a new phase in this race against time, a battle for life that was about to begin. The mobile phone in Carlos's hand looked like a useless brick. The signal bars floated, appearing and disappearing like ghosts in the small screen. Each time I tried to make the call fell. Frustration was gone inside, a sense of bitter impotence, while the animal, a few meters away, continued to suffer. He walked from side to side in the small clearing, his arm extended in the air in a desperate attempt to capture a Fujidia radio wave. Helena watched him with a tight heart, his own anxiety to mirror his. The fate of that magnificent creature depended on such a worldly technology and, at that moment, so unfair. It seemed a cruelty of the universe that in a place of so much natural beauty, the connection to the world of help was so weak. Time was running out, and every failed call attempt was like an extra nail in the bull coffin. Finally, in a small summit at the end of the clearing, a single signal bar appeared and remained firm. Carlos did not hesitate. With urgent fingers, he marked the animal rescue number, his voice out hoarse and hurried when someone finally answered. "I need help. A large animal, a bull, is injured in the forest." He tried to keep his calm, explaining the location in the best way he could, using the trail as the main reference and describing the hidden clearing. On the other side of the line, the professional voice of the dispatcher was reassuring, but the urgency of the situation was clear. They asked him a series of questions to evaluate the gravity and type of resources needed. Carlos, with his eyes fixed on the suffering bull, described the bizarre swelling, the laborious breathing, and the animal's lethargy, painting a dark picture of the situation. The so-called was his only lifeline, the only bridge for salvation. After off the phone, with the promise that a veterinary team would be sent immediately, a new type of agony began. The wait. The clearing, which was once full of the tension of the discovery, was now immersed in heavy and expectant silence. Carlos joined Helena, and together they kept their vigil. They sat at a respectful distance, observing each movement, every breath of the bull. Time dragged on. The minutes looked like hours. The sun moved slowly through the sky. The shadows of the trees stretch over the forest floor like the fingers of time. They spoke in whispers, sharing fears and hopes. What if the team didn't find them? What if they arrived too late? The bull alternated between periods of exhausted stillness and spasms of pain that made them shudder with empathy. They were the involuntary guardians of that giant, and the weight of this responsibility was immense. During the long wait, Helena felt an irresistible need to do more than just observing. She filled her bottle of water in a small stream that ran near the clearing and slowly approached the animal. He left the bottle on the floor at a distance that the bull could reach if he wanted. A small gesture of care, a relief offer. The animal watched her with his big, sad eyes, but made no movement toward the water. His pain seemed to consume everything, leaving him without strength even for the most basic needs. Even so, Helena felt that it was important to show that they cared, that they were not just there as spectators. His act of kindness, however small, was a statement of his humanity and his connection with the suffering creature. It was a lighthouse of compassion in the darkness of his agony. The sound of the engine, when it finally arrived, was the sweetest song they had ever heard. First it was a low, almost imperceptible tinnitus that could have been the wind. But then it got stronger, more defined, the unmistakable sound of a vehicle fighting the irregular terrain. Carlos and Helena put on a heel, their hearts accelerate with a new wave of hope. They waved their arms, shouting to guide the rescue team toward them. The view of the veterinarian to emerge through the trees was like seeing a rescue ship on the horizon after a wreck. The relief was so overwhelming that Helena felt tears sprouting her eyes. They were no longer alone. The cavalry had come, and with it, the promise of knowledge, equipment, and a true opportunity to save the bull. From the van came a middle-aged man with a calm and competent air who performed as Dr. Arantes. He carried a large bag of equipment, and his gaze rapidly evaluated the situation. The massive animal, his precarious condition, and the couple of worried walkers. He thanked Carlos and Helena for staying and called, his voice conveying a professional tranquility that immediately calmed them. As he approached the bull, he asked questions, gathering more information. How long has he been like this? Any change in his behavior since they found him? His methodical and focused approach was a sharp contrast to the emotional anxiety that the couple felt. They were handing over to an expert, and the sense of relief was palpable. Dr. Arantes moved with a quiet confidence that only years of experience could provide. He spoke to the bull with a low and firm voice, announcing every movement of his, avoiding surprises that could shake the animal. First, he observed at a distance, his eyes trained to analyze the bull's posture, the pattern of his breathing, the color of his gums. Then, with slow and deliberate movements, he approached, extending his hand so that the animal could smell it. The bull remained passive, seeming to understand that the help had finally arrived. Carlos and Helena watched, fascinated and full of hope. The veterinarian's arrival had turned the clearing of a place of desperation into an emergency operations center, an open-air hospital where a life was at stake. The veterinarian took his stethoscope and, with the courage that impressed the couple, leaned him to the bull's massive chest, listening carefully to the sounds of his heart and his lungs. He frowned, his expression becoming more serious. Then he turned his attention to the swollen abdomen, the source of mystery and pain. He put on a pair of long gloves and began to gently palpate the tense area. His expertise was evident. His hands read the animal's body as a braille text. The bull moaned low with the touch, but did not react aggressively. He seemed resigned to his destiny, trusting that stranger who was examining him. The air was dense of expectation. What would he find out? After a few moments of careful palpation, Dr. Arantes was very quiet. He withdrew his hand and looked at her, then to the bull, and finally to Carlos and Helena. His professional composure hesitated for a moment, and an expression of pure unbelief passed through his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated, as if he was fighting to find the right words to describe what he had just discovered. The clearing tension has reached its peak. The couple arrested their hearts hammering the hands. The long wait was over. The help had come, and now the moment of the truth was over them. The secret contained in the black giant's body was about to be revealed. and the expression on the vet's face told them that it would be something they could never have imagined. Dr. Arantes knelt next to the sleeping giant, his expression a mixture of intense and deep empathy concentration. Its presence was a soothing force in the clearance loaded with tension. For Carlos and Helena, who had spent hours in an anxious vigil, the veterinarian's arrival was like aurora after a long, dark night. They observed their every move, every decision with renewed hope. The veterinarian was his only connection to a positive result, the embodiment of expertise in a sea of uncertainty. He landed his equipment with methodical efficiency, syringes, bottles, and instruments that seemed strangely small beside the animal's massive body. Each object was a symbol of hope, a tool that could help unravel the mystery and relieve the suffering they witnessed. His calm contrasted strongly with the whirlwind of emotions that the couple felt. He began by managing a soft sedative, explaining that he needed to keep the animal as calm to perform proper examination without causing more stress or pain. The needle seemed tiny against the thick skin of the bull, but the medicine effected quickly. The animal's breathing became slower and more regular, and the tension in his body seemed to slow down. It was a little relief, a step in the right direction, but the underlying cause of the problem remained a scary puzzle. Dr. Arantes continued his work, using the stethoscope to auscultate the animal's heart and lungs. His forehead frowned in concentration. He murmured observations for himself, pieces of a puzzle that only he could see. Carlos and Helena remained silent, not wanting to disturb her focus, feeling like apprentices in the presence of a master. The focus of the exam then moved to the swollen and tense abdomen. The veterinarian put on some long gloves that reached his shoulders, and with extreme care began to palpate the area. His hands moved with a trained sensitivity, pressing and feeling, trying to decipher the story that the animal's body told. The bull, now under the effect of the sedative, only moaned gently. For a long moment, the only sound in the clearing was the breath of the animal and the smoothness of the leaves to the wind. Don Arantes was completely absorbed in his work, his face a study of concentration. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if trying to visualize what his hands felt, navigating the giant's internal anatomy just by touch. The tension was almost unbearable. Suddenly, Dr. Arantes's hands stopped. His eyes suddenly opened, and his professional expression was collapsed. A visible shockwave passed through his face, replacing the concentration with pure grave. He slowly removed his hand, as if he had touched something forbidden or impossible. He looked at his glove, then to the bull's flank, and then his gaze found Carlos and Helena. The color had disappeared from his face. He was pale, his lips slightly inside out disbelief. The silence that followed was heavier and louder than any sound that preceded it. Helena's heart stopped. What had he found? What horrible truth could shake such an experienced and calm professional? Fear came back in full force, a cold node in the stomach. This is impossible, murmured Dr. Arantes, his voice little more than a shocked whisper. He slowly shook his head, as if trying to deny what his own senses told him. Extracting the segment. Are you sure? Audio extracted. I've seen a lot of things in my career, but never nothing like that. He paused, gathering his thoughts, trying to find a way to explain the inexplicable. Carlos stepped forward, unable to contain his anxiety longer. What is it, doctor? What is he? Is it a tumor? Is it something he ate? The questions were hurried, a torrent of concern. The vet raised a hand to silence them, his gaze still distant, as if looking at something far beyond that clearing. First, he said, his voice gaining a little strength, This is not a bull. The statement stopped in the air, confused and shocking. Carlos and Helena looked at the massive animal, their imposing horns to their powerful structure. What do you mean it wasn't a bull? It was the definition of a bull. Dr. Arantes saw the confusion in his faces and continued. It's a female, a cow. A very robust breed with horns, but it's a female. And the swelling? It's not a disease. It's not a tumor. He took a dramatic break, letting the weight of his words sit. The mystery deepened every second, the revelation to arrive in layers of shock and unbelief. Their world seemed to have turned upside down. Then came the final blow, the revelation that completely redefined the situation. "She is pregnant," said Dr. Arantes, his still-tinged voice with astonishment, "and she is not able to give birth. The calf is stuck. And that's not all." He approached again, placing his portable ultrasound stethoscope against the cow's abdomen. He turned on the small screen and turned it so that the couple could see. In the screen, among the gray and indistinct forms, they saw it, a small heart flashing frantically. And then another. "They are twins," whispered the vet, his voice full of amazement. "Cracks are extremely rare in cattle. And their position, that's why she can't give birth. They are blocking each other." The revelation was overwhelming. The image on the small screen was the irrefutable proof of an almost impossible complication. Two small hearts beating desperately inside the mother, who struggled to give them life. The suffering of the cow suddenly assumed a new meaning. It was not just your own pain. It was the pain of childbirth, the struggle to bring new lives to the world against all odds. The agony in his gaze, which they had interpreted as a request for help to themselves, was also an appeal for their children to be born. The emotional complexity of the situation hit Carlos and Helena with the strength of a wave. His discovery in the forest was not about death, but about life. A life that was dangerously close to being extinguished, even before it began. The pale vet's pale face was not of fear before a disease, but shock at a complicated and dangerous miracle. He was facing an obstetric scenario of 1 in 1,000,000, right there, in the middle of the forest, with limited resources. The life of the mother and the life of 2 calves for birth were in her hands. The shocking revelation transformed the desperation into urgency. The fight was no longer just to save an animal, but 3. The clearing suddenly became the stage of one of the most primordial dramas of nature, the miracle and the danger of birth. And they, the 2 walkers and the Fiat vet, were the only ones who could intervene. The pallor on Dr. Arantes's face was the reflection of the enormity of the task ahead. The diagnosis stopped in the air of the clearing, dense and heavy. Twins, a rare and dangerous complication. Dr. Arantes rose, his mind to work at a dizzying speed, calculating the probabilities, evaluating the options. "We cannot move. Transportation in this state would be fatal to her and the calves," he declared, his now firm and authority voice. "We have to give birth here, now." The statement was a shock for Carlos and Helena. The idea of performing such a complex procedure right there on the forest floor seemed like a Herculean task, almost impossible. But the determined look of the veterinarian left no room for doubts. It was the only hypothesis they had. The clearing, its refuge of peace, was about to become an emergency delivery room, and they, mere walkers, would be the assistants. Dr. Arantes began to give orders, his professional calm to turn anxiety into focused action. "I need clean water as much as they can, and of all the cloths or towels they have in your backpacks." Carlos and Helena immediately took action, the task giving them a purpose, a way of channeling their adrenaline and worry. They ran to the nearby stream, filling their bottles of water and Cantus as they emptied their backpacks, removing coats, camping towels, and everything that could be useful. Meanwhile, the veterinarian prepared his instruments, sterilizing them with a solution he brought in his suitcase. He was creating a makeshift sterile field in the middle of the wild nature, a small island of modern medicine in an ocean of uncertainty. The struggle for life had started seriously. The cow, which we are going to call Victory, like Helena named her silently, moaned softly under the effect of the sedative, but contractions continued to shake her massive body. It was a race against the clock. Exhaustion and prolonged childbirth stress were charging their price. Dr. Arantes explained the situation in simple and direct terms. The first calf is in a pelvic position, which means it is coming out of the rear, and its legs are folded down, blocking the passage. The second is positioned correctly, but has no room to leave because of the first. I have to reposition the first calf manually. The description made Carlos swallow hard. The task seemed not only difficult, but also extremely dangerous for both veterinarian and animals. With the sleeves rolled up and arms covered by a special lubricant, Dr. Arantes began the delicate and physically demanding procedure. He inserted his arm into the cow's birth canal, an image that will be forever recorded in the memory of Carlos and Helena. His face writhing with effort, his tense muscles as he worked blindly, trusting only in his sense of touch and in his vast knowledge of anatomy. He constantly spoke to his cow in a soothing voice, explaining what he was doing, as if she could understand. "Hold on, girl. I'm almost there. I just need to find her leg." Minutes that looked like hours passed, sweat dripping through the vet's forehead, mixing with dirt and determination on his face. Carlos and Helena had crucial papers. Helena kept talking to Victory, caressing her head, trying to convey strength and comfort through touch and voice. Carlos was next to the vet, passing on instruments, holding the bottles and providing moral support. They became an unlikely team, united by a common goal, to save those 3 lives. At that moment, there were no differences between them. They were only 3 human beings fighting the forces of nature to protect one of their miracles. The experience was intense and visceral, stripping them of all the trivialities of everyday life and linking them to something primary and deeply significant. They were participating in the cycle of life and death in a way they never imagined. After what seemed an eternity of agonizing effort, Dr. Arantes released a cry of triumph. I managed to turn my leg." With the obstruction partially resolved, he began to pull softly in sync with the cow contractions. It was a slow and hard process. The veterinarian's strength, combined with the end effort of his exhausted mother, began to bear fruit. Slowly, very slowly, a pair of small hooves appeared, followed by a rear legs. With another coordinated tug, the first calf was born, slipping to a leafy bed and grass. It was small, wet, and immovable. For a moment of breathing, they thought they had arrived too late. The silence was deafening. Dr. Arantes did not lose a second. He took the small body, quickly cleaned his nose and mouth of the mucus, and gave him a vigorous spanking in the flank. Nothing. He repeated the process, blowing air to his nostrils. Suddenly the small body shuddered, coughed and released a small holy, a fragile sound that echoed in the clearing as the most powerful of hymns. It was alive. Helena cried openly, tears of relief and joy running down her face. While she was beginning to dry her first newborn with a towel, the vet was already turning her attention to her mother. "It's not over yet," he said, panting. "We have to take the second." The fight had not yet ended. The second delivery was easier. With the first calf out of the way, the second, which was positioned correctly, was born relatively quickly. He also needed a little stimulus to start breathing, but soon joined his brother with a shaking bark. The clearing was now full of new and fragile life. Victoria, the warrior mother, slowly lifted her head, her big tired eyes to look for her babies. Don Garantes, with Carlos's help, pushed the calves closer to his head. She began to lick them vigorously, their maternal instinct to overlap with their exhaustion and pain. It was a scene of overwhelming beauty and tenderness. The fight had been brutal, a battle fought against incredible probabilities, but they had won. They looked at the new family, the mother, exhausted to take care of her miraculous twins, the exhausted but triumphant veterinarian, and the couple of transformed walkers, with the hearts overflowing with an barely containing emotion. The victory was not just about the cow, it was all of them. It was a victory of compassion on indifference, intervention on resignation, and life on death. In that isolated clearing, under the attentive eye of the afternoon sun, a small miracle had happened, forged by the joint effort of strangers who became a family in the fight for a greater cause. Just transcribe. He took the small body, quickly cleaned his nose and mouth of mucus, and gave him a vigorous spanking in the flank. Nothing. He repeated the process, blowing air into his nostrils. Suddenly, the dust settled and a peaceful silence descended over the clearing, broken only by the softening of the newborn calves and the affectionate sounds of his mother. Victoria, the heroic cow, licked her puppies with tireless dedication, cleaning them, warming them, and marking them as her own. His gaze, once full of agony and despair, was now full of fierce tenderness and protection. The transformation was remarkable. The pain of delivery had given way to the joy of motherhood. Carlos and Helena watched, sitting at a short distance, their hearts full of deep admiration. The strength of that mother, her resilience in the face of unimaginable pain, was a lesson of humility. They had witnessed not only a medical miracle, but also the primordial and unbreakable power of maternal love in its purest form. Dr. Arantes, though visibly exhausted, continued his work with meticulous care. He administered antibiotics and painkillers to Victory to prevent infections and relieve his pain. He checked the calves, making sure they were breathing well and had not suffered any injuries during difficult delivery. He was the image of professional dedication, his commitment to the well-being of his patients to extend far beyond the dramatic moment of birth. He explained to Carlos and Helena that, although the worst had already passed, the family still needed intensive care. The mother was weak, and the twin calves were vulnerable. His long-term survival depended on his care in the next few hours and crucial days. His journey had not yet ended. While Dr. Arantes made a call to organize specialized transport to animals, Carlos and Helena reflected on the roller coaster of emotions they had lived. His morning walk, which had begun with the promise of peace and tranquility, had become one of the most intense and significant experiences of his lives. They had been confronted with imminent suffering and death, and instead of moving away, they had chosen to get involved, make a difference. His decision to investigate that strange sound had triggered a chain of events that resulted in the salvation of 3 lives. They felt a deep sense of gratitude and purpose. That day, they were not just spectators of nature. They were active participants in their large and complex web. The transportation team arrived a few hours later with a special cattle trailer equipped with everything necessary to move the new family safely. It took several strong men and Dr. Arantes' specialized guidance to get Victoria, still weak, to get up and get into the tow. your calves were kindly charged and placed by your side. The family would be taken to an animal sanctuary, a place where they would receive all the veterinary care they needed and where they could live the rest of their lives in peace and security without the threat of slaughterhouses or wildlife. It was the happy ending that everyone expected, the perfect culmination for an extraordinary day. Seeing the mother and her puppies from a safe future was the biggest reward. Seeing the trailer disappearing along the dirt road, a feeling of melancholy mixed with joy settled on Carlos and Helena. The clearing seemed suddenly empty and silent. The drama was over and normal life was waiting to complain. But they knew they would never be the same. The experience had changed in a fundamental way. They had learned a powerful lesson about compassion, about the importance of acting in the face of suffering, as scary or inconvenient as the situation may seem. They had seen firsthand how a small act of kindness could have monumental consequences. His connection to each other and the natural world had deepened in a way that words could barely express. The walk back to the main trail was silent, but it was a different silence from the morning. It was no longer just about peace and tranquility, but about reflection and reverence. Each tree, every sound of the forest, seemed now more vibrant, more alive. They felt more connected to the world's pulse. They had touched the heart of life and death and came out on the other side with a renewed appreciation for the fragility and beauty of everything. The physical tiredness they felt was overshadowed by a sense of spiritual fullness. They had done the right thing, and that certainty was a balm to their souls. The unexpected adventure had given them a story to tell, but more importantly, had given them a new perspective on their place in the world. Weeks later, they received an email from Dr. Arantes. It contained a photograph. In the image, Vitoria was standing in a green pasture, looking strong and healthy. By his side, two robust and playful calves ran and jumped, full of life and energy. The email said everyone was thriving in the sanctuary and that their story had become an inspiration to all who worked there. Helena printed the photograph and put it on the refrigerator door, a daily reminder of that amazing day. It was a testimony of his act of compassion and the chain of kindness he had triggered. The image was proof that hope can be found in the most unexpected places. The story of Vitoria and its twins has become a local legend, told and retold, a testimony of the power of empathy. For Carlos and Helena, however, it was more than a story. It was a memory recorded in their hearts, a milestone in their lives. They continued their walks in the mountains, but now they walked with a new sense of conscience, their eyes and ears more aware of the secrets and stories that nature had to tell. They have learned that the greatest treasures are not found in maps, but in the unexpected meetings that test our character and open our hearts. Their adventure with the black giant taught them that the greatest reward of life is not what we receive, but what we choose to give. And so, life continued, but with a new layer of meaning. Carlos and Helena aged, but their souls remained young, enriched by the memory of that day when they dodged the trail and found their purpose in a sunny clearing. They have learned that each living being has a story, and that sometimes we have the privilege of becoming part of this story, helping to write a happy chapter. The compassion lesson they have learned from a brave cow and their miraculous twins has become the compass that guided them for the rest of their days, a constant reminder that even the smaller acts of kindness can create hinders of hope that extend far beyond what we can see. What begins as a quiet walk on the mountain quickly turns into a drama of life or death. A couple of walkers deviate from their path by hearing a sound of suffering, just to find a magnificent black bull on the edge of death. His majesty is overshadowed by visible agony, and a mystery lies in his swollen body. Desperate for help, they can call a local vet to the remote place. The arrival of help brings a wave of relief, but what the vet discovers by examining the giant animal leaves it pale and speechless. Revelation is not just shocking, it is a biological impossibility that turns a desperate rescue into a race against time to save not one, but several lives against all odds. What did he see inside? The answer will challenge everything you thought you know about nature.